welcome back to the Advancing Healthcare Innovation Show. And I'm your host, Michael Stamatinos. And if you're new to us, welcome. We're super excited to have you here because we're bringing exciting conversations with incredible leaders that are painstakingly shaping the future of healthcare. And we're really passionate around healthcare innovation, adoption, and leadership. And if it's your first time tuning in, let me just sort of take a quick step back and tell you about what we're all about, what we're trying to do here. So we are a healthcare innovation company. We're focused on bringing stories of innovation from real people that are in the trenches day in and day out that are truly innovating. We want to give them a platform to share their story with our community and with the world. And if you haven't checked out any of the historical interviews, make sure you hit the subscribe button now where you get any of the new interviews coming, and then feel free to binge watch on some of the older ones. And as part of our commitment to keep you updated with the latest advancements and solutions within healthcare, we really do our best to bring on innovative leaders that are pushing the boundaries and shaking things up. So I'm honored to introduce our next guest, someone who's a visionary and accomplished leader, Dr. Rodney Woods. He's the Vice President and Chief Clinical Engineer at BlueCross BlueShield of Tennessee. And Dr. Woods, I'd say he's an expert at leveraging strategic planning with tactical execution, where he's been able to optimize and efficiently maneuver operations. And they've been able to do some incredible things as a disruptor to be able to drive streamlined efficiencies. And during his tenure at BCBS in Tennessee, Dr. Woods has been really successful at leading several significant projects. He's implemented strategic roadmaps and contributed substantially to the financial savings for the organization. And it's not just business transformation methodologies that he's really all about. But I think what really makes Dr. Woods exceptional, more or less his superpower, is his renowned ability to understand people and to meet them where they're at on their journeys and really drive more of a culture-oriented leadership style. And outside of work, he really devotes his time to volunteering in many respects, one of which is the Tennessee Center for Performance Excellence, where he's really passionate around strategic planning and development of others, and as he continues to make a meaningful impact in his community. So Dr. Woods, it's great to see you again, and welcome to the show.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here, Michael, and I thank you just for the opportunity just to be on your show and just to engage in a conversation around a favorite topic of mine.
Yeah, so I mean, you've had a really interesting career path, career trajectory. By trade, you're an engineer, so your thinking's a little bit different. Can you maybe just share a little bit with the audience, a little bit about some of the areas of focus that you're tuning into now, but maybe how you've kind of crescendoed into what you're doing now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, healthcare was never on the roadmap, but things happen for a reason. So yes, my career started back in manufacturing, right out of engineering school, working for Duracell, the battery company, as a frontline engineer. But as things would happen, they also put the first level engineers through a supervisory training program. And I think I always look back and laugh about it. I think they wanted to find out which one of the engineers they need to put behind a closed door because they don't need to be interacting with people because they're so strange, and which ones they need to put into training programs. And so I fell on the side of I guess you want to call the sheep side, not the goats that they want to hide. And so they put me through a 2-year training program, which was different because you never learn how to deal with people coming through an engineering program. My background's electrical engineering and mathematics. And so that started a different journey for me around how do you take technology and interact it with people. And during that state was some great learning experiences for me. The funny story being when I walked in, I was the third engineer that was taking over a group of technicians. Now, these are hardcore ex-military people, and they didn't like degreed engineers, so they were chewing up and spitting them out. So I was definitely walking into a den of lions at this point. I laugh because early this week, one of my former technicians, we stay in contact with each other, and he called and said, "Rodney, I want to apologize. I mean, we gave you the meal. I mean, we just tried to spit you up." He said, "But you made an impact, and on our lives even after I left. So, but it was interesting because when I walked in, knowing the fact of what had happened before, the only thing I could think of, and maybe purely by accident or by by God's grace in this aspect, I walked into my, I said, I don't know anything. Yeah, I have a degree in electrical engineering, but you guys have literally built half of this plant, and I'm here to learn from you. And they all looked at each other, and I can remember the exact words that came out of the lead text mouth. He says, "I think we're going to like you." And right there was a revelation for me that said, don't try to walk in with arrogance or with like it all. Sure. I mean, from a degree perspective, I knew more about electrical engineering and theory and everything else, but what they had is what I needed, was how to relate to people along those lines. So that was the first journey. And the first sort of innovative thing that we did was take robotic technology that was being developed or actually being utilized in the automotive industry, and we're bringing it into packaging. And there again was almost like mutiny when the people on the lines were figuring that, hey, we're bringing these robots in. There again, it's almost like AI. We'll get to that later.
Yeah.
They're going to take over the world. These are women who've been working in this plant. I mean, the plant was established in 1961. So by the time I got there in the late 80s and early 90s, they're saying, you're going to get rid of us. And there again, the lesson learned was, how do I relate this new technology that need to be in our facility, but at the same time, give them a level of comfort. And what I noticed, and this is part of innovation, is they had a need just like we had a need. The need I noticed was they were dealing with carpal tunnel, and they were dealing with back injuries. And these are women who had grandkids and everything else. And the one thing I asked, I said, what's the most important thing to you? When you leave Duracell and everything else, they said, well, spending time with my grandkids. I said, well, with carpal tunnel and back injury, I said, you're not going to be able to pick these grandkids up. But if I bring this robotic technology in and let them do the heavy lifting, what they're good at, and let you do your part, I said, you'll be hugging your grandkids until it's time for you to go home. And they looked at me and said, we like that. And so I engaged them in the process of innovation and what needed to be done. And that's sort of, there again, by happenstance, you can read all the books you want, but until you interact with people and really figure out their need versus, almost like it's more about them and not about you aspect, it really sort of drives the sort of change. Fast forward, into healthcare, it's no different, working with nurses, working with doctors and everything else. It's really finding out, what's important to them. How can you help them? Not how you eliminate them, but how can you help them and augment what they're doing so they can really operate at the top of their degree or their license and things along those lines. And so there's just been some great opportunities of taking new technology that is coming in and really coming alongside and addressing concerns and everything else that sort of limits people in doing their work. In essence, it's getting rid of a lot of frustration along those lines as well.
Before we get into the innovation component, I get the sense, Rodney, that you just spew out this air of humility. Have you always been that way since a kid?
The way I got here, Michael, be quite honest, I was raised in a family of 12, so 6 boys and 6 girls. So my dad, during the summer, the older two, we had to work construction with him. Okay, he was the supervisor. And so, we went, hey, my dad's supervisor, so I can, walk around with a chip on my shoulder and say, you can't touch me. Boy, my dad gave us the roughest, we got the grunts of the job. We ate last for lunch and everything else. And it was for a reason. He said, don't ever think that the rest of these men out here who are trying to make a living and everything else, that you're better than them. And so, that was the sort of aspect of him helping us realize that no matter where people are in the station of their life, they are just as human as anyone else. And that was probably the first instance where he would take us down to homeless shelters or whatever and hand out food. Just a reminder that no matter who they are important people. And
That's right.
and that so there's been ebbs and flows. I remember going through engineering school, coming back and challenging my dad because I knew calculus, differential equations, and everything else. And course, he did not, go to that level of education in his life, but he was a hard worker and a man of character and ethics. And he put me in my place, by the practical knowledge that he had. But then he always told me something. He said, the worst thing that you can do with that education is to try to humiliate somebody with it. And that was like, hit me with a 2 by 4. And so whatever the education that you have is not to be used for your personal gain, but how can you benefit other people? He says, all I have is what I have, but I was at least able to provide for you 12 kids without going on welfare. And I knew I had to work hard. He says, so I'm giving you the opportunity to learn, get a better education than what I've had, but never have an attitude of arrogance. He says, because it will eat you alive, and it'll cause a downfall for you. So it's been a learning process for me. And I've had, fortunate having a dad, but other mentors in my life who really had to confront me and tell me specifically that there are things I need to correct in my character. And I'm very, very grateful for those individuals.
Amazing. So when you think about innovation and your approach to innovation, and during your time at Duracell and then now at BlueCross BlueShield in Tennessee, has anything changed? And if so, what?
Yeah, I think what's changed for me, in the earlier days, it's always like, that trying to catch some like lightning in a bottle and become famous and on the front cover of some magazine and everything else. What's never happened. I think what I've learned through the years and even now are two important things. One, innovation is about something that's new. People either are oblivious to it, don't see it, along those lines. So, doing some new. But the other piece of what I've learned is, what value is it bringing? So it's new, but you always got to think about it, what value is it bringing into a culture, an organization, or whatever. And so
How do you
now,
define the value? How do you define value?
yeah, the value that I look at, not only just from a technology perspective, but the impact on society. I look at what's the
I see.
ethical ramifications around that. Are there any sort of what's the economic benefit, because that's what's important to companies. So look at that from those different aspects, and not just answering the question of can it be done, but it's also answering the question of why should it be done. And because if the end game is more about your personal gain and your notoriety or whatever, and it has a negative impact along those lines, then you've done more harm than good. And so I try to at least work with another aspect, work with a diverse group of people who think differently than I am, who are not afraid to challenge me. And I always say, this is not a title thing. This is engagement and conversation, because that, to me, that's how I grew. I learn surrounding myself and being around people who are a lot smarter than me. It's not intimidation, but to me, it's really engaging that aspect. And so I want them to challenge those ideas. I want them to get me to think more deeply and ask the why questions along those lines, the purpose, the value, and things moving forward. So in essence, that's how I start thinking through a lot of innovative things. Or what I've also found is, a lot of people don't have those highfalutin degrees and everything else, but some of the most innovative thinking or thoughts and ideas sometimes come from somebody that is probably the most quiet person in a room, or somebody that you just ignore. Along those lines. So I definitely try to find those individuals out and get to know them, engage with them, and grow with them along those lines.
Well, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the culture of innovation
Mhm.
within your group,
Mhm.
and not just Blue Cross Blue Shield
Yeah,
Tennessee as a
yeah.
whole, but also like within your locus of control. What are some of the areas that you and the team have been focused on? And as we kind of go into this next chapter in the new year, what are you focused on for the new year as well?
Yeah, I think, for the bulk of my career, and everything else, being a Lean Six Sigma black belt and everything along those lines, has always been continuous improvement. you look at your processes or look at the organization and culture, because processes and people and technology all go together, and try to figure out, are we doing all the right value steps? Because there's always something that's non-value added sometimes that creeps in that you really want to get out of the way in that regard. So a lot of that's been around a lot of the continuous improvement aspect. What I've found is once you stabilize a process and things of that nature, something sort of magical happens. Innovation becomes an inflection point. Everything is moving, humming around. It's doing great, and then all of a sudden somebody said, why don't we do it this way? Can we, maybe shorten this path or whatever? And that's because now that you have a standard operating procedure along those lines, and people are in tune to what's happening, they are free to think very, very creatively and offer suggestions and take credit and ownership for it. I mean, that's been part of my sort of way of operating is, I don't want to take credit for somebody else's work. I don't want to, say, hey, Rodney Woods did this. I've always, if somebody came with the idea and it went, I pointed a person that really brought it to fruition. To me, that's been part of my leadership. It's always been part of why I sort of attract people who want to work with me, because I'm not trying to, steal or grab those ideas. To me, that's very, very important as I look at the people I interact with from an innovation aspect along those lines. So that's been part of it. It's looking at no problem's crazy, no problem's stupid, no problem is off limits. Always people said think outside the box and everything else along those lines. I go back and forth. I talked to a friend of mine who does innovation as well, and came out of the automobile industry. He said sometimes the box, those constraints, allows you to think creatively, because you only have a limited set of tools and things. So what can you do? And he said, then there's other options where there is no boundary. So, how can you wildly think of something that might seem off the wall, but in the end, you do something that's very impactful. So he said it ebbs and flows in that regard.
So along those same lines, let's think about that, because in the health plan business, highly regulated. So from a person from the outside, you can say that there's lots of constraints.
Sure.
Can you draw upon an example when there was a bunch of constraints, and how kind of articulate the continuous process improvement and then the inflection point? So give us like an example, a concrete example, so that maybe we can crystallize it a little bit.
Sure. In any healthcare organization, especially when you do a lot of clinical people and everything else, there are structured things that you have to do, especially if you're under certain guidelines or requirements. But what happens is sometimes those requirements, are there for a reason, but sometimes they can get old and stale and not move as society changes. For instance, one of the things that happened where, we've gone from a society that we're using landlines, everybody had a telephone line and everything else, to mobile devices. And what we found was that there, as you're trying to reach out to individuals and you're getting a busy signal, not busy, but you're not getting anyone, the frustration was, nobody is home. Well, there's a reason for that. Our society has become more transient. And so nobody's going to be on the landline. So we had to step back and think, okay, so how do we reach these individuals? And it's almost just like, we were so close to the forest and everything else, we couldn't even recognize anything until I just said, well, I can tell you, if you called me, you wouldn't reach me, because you know what I have? And I just pulled that out and showed it. I had one of these. And it's like, that's the reason why you can't get them. I said, we got to change the way we look at the people that we're dealing with and the tools that are in their hands, which was a mobile phone. Can we still do the same regulatory types of things that are necessary? Absolutely, but we got to do it digitally. So how do we do that? And so we started, looking for companies and everything else that were moving in that direction, we found one and did sort of a proof of concept, and worked beautiful because it answered a question in the minds of people. Because you go into work early in the morning, or you coming home from work, last thing you want to do is talk to somebody in customer service, okay? So, but if I can at least approach them digitally as they're already on Facebook or things along those lines, and knowing that they can actually text securely, to a clinician or non-clinician along those lines, now you have their attention, and that was the process of what we were doing was already there. The inflection point came was there was a change in technology, landline to mobile, and there then you think about it. Because the funny point would be is okay, but okay, I'm doing things, texting and everything else, but what if I need to call them? And I said, well, the last time I checked, I can still call on my mobile phone. So the two,
Mhm.
so, but that's not, sort of shaming in any way. It's just the way we try to shift our thinking to utilize a tool that has multiple applications. And so that was a game changer for us in moving in that direction. And now it's like, okay, what more can we do to satisfy, that sort of hunger in that healthcare sector and group of members, and along those lines of, yeah, I want. It's almost like me and Delta Airlines and my financial group. I don't want to talk to you unless I really need to talk to you. Everything else I want to do. Okay, and that sort of demand now falls in healthcare, and so we see that sort of how can I provide those level of services and reach into that person's life or whatever when they need to be impacted along those lines. So to me, that's where you actually see and listen and engage in the opportunity, both not only internally but also externally, and applying innovation and technology at the right point along those lines.
There's a level of sensitivity when it comes to communicating with members. How long typically do you guys do proof of concepts, and then to what degree that you're actually able to share? Um, what do you look for in terms of success metrics when it comes to proof of concepts?
Yeah, and it really depends on some of them. Generally, 3 months, 6 months, not 9 months, and no further than that. To some of them, sometimes
Mhm.
you go to a year, depending on the complexity along those lines. But what we found is as you're getting into those sort of minimal viable products and proof of concepts and everything else, you start seeing some of the returns, the outcomes that you're looking for real early at times. And it's not unusual. You get into those and all of a sudden they want to shift it from proof of concept to full blown transition. That's where I say the fun happens is now you're really, hey, I was planning to do this, next year, but now you want me to do it in less than 3 months, because the excitement is now seen. And so part of it is, when you look at some of those metrics and things, of course, one of the big ones for executives would be, what's the return on the investment? If I put this money in, am I going to see, 1 for 1 or 1.5 or 2 times the return and everything else? That is a proper question for any executive, especially with new technologies that's coming in. The other aspect, you look at is, am I impacting the lives of these patients and members in the right way that I can measure? Are they getting well? Are they getting access to the right information, not just information, but the right information for them? And so setting up, really good, 3 to 5 types of metrics that you can measure and show success in that regard validates not only the technology, but also the staffing, everything else that's around it to be able to impact, those members. And also maybe even soliciting some feedback from them. Hey, is this helpful? Or how can we improve on what we're doing? So definitely it's holistic in its approach by engaging everyone across the spectrum in that whole process.
I mean, how big is the team when it comes to implementing proof of concepts? Like, are you talking about significant size teams? Are you talking smaller teams? Where do you
Yeah,
find the happy medium to be in terms of
yeah,
execution and getting stuff done?
yeah. Generally, it's a lot better probably do found with smaller teams for a number of reasons. One, you want people who are excited about change. Not everybody likes change. Okay, I think all of us realize it being an innovation. I had a professor one time. He said, in any organization where innovation happens, there's always innovation antibodies. They'll attack the innovation and try to kill it. So you definitely want to find people who understand what you're doing and want to engage, in that sort of transformation. So generally starting with a small team of individuals who are excited, who can embrace change. And as they're going through it, their pivotal role would be, they're connected to the rest of the organization, to people who know that, hey, this is going great. So they can become your messengers. So it's a double-edged sword. One, they're helping you progress as a smaller team, but at the same time, they're engaging their sort of colleagues in the conversation and delivering that message for you as well. So I found smaller teams are a lot better. I've done large scale, and that's always been quite challenging and sometimes detrimental. And so I love the approach of finding smaller teams, people who are focused, people who are not afraid if something happens, like a failure point and everything else. It's not frustration, but learning. Okay, what can we learn from this and pivot in that regard? And then that way, the success becomes more meaningful, but also it's almost, in essence, almost a guarantee that you have people who are willing to help you fight through because they see the end goal. This is true north. Here's where we're going, and it's not a straight path at times.
You know what it sounds like? It sounds like very much like a startup. You're building these
Yes.
experiments. You understand that failure equals learning, rate of failure equals speed of learning. How
Right.
can we then take those learnings and reapply them? And do you see that that's sort of, you've engineered that culture within this specific area? And do you find that to be truthful? And I'm just going to say this because it just seems as though there's a stigma around health plans doing things a certain way and not being as innovative as many would like them to be.
Mhm.
It seems as though that you've found a happy medium in being able to innovate within certain pockets
Yeah.
faster than others.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. I mean, any large organization struggles, with it's almost like, to your point, you start grassroots as a small startup, but as you grow and everything else, sometimes you lose that sort of DNA that got you where you are today. And
Yeah.
so you have to really be sort of thoughtful and about innovation and what it really means. So yes, you see innovation happen in pockets across the organization. The goal would be is how do you make sure that you're capturing those innovative thoughts and people who are innovative, because a lot of them don't have titles, in that regard. So one of the key things that you're doing is allow them to have a voice to share what they know. So it is an ebb and flow, especially now since after the pandemic, when people are now more remote, and that distance of people feeling that they're not part of the organization is where we're trying to say, okay, how do we still get that sort of dynamic back, and have people feel like they're still part and connected to the organization. So it's definitely been a challenge, but to me, that's where the action is really connecting with people in a different way. What I found is you got to communicate a lot more. That's really the key thing.
Okay. And as we sort of transition towards and coming to the end of our conversation here, I just want to kind of get your thoughts. There's been quite a bit in the news around AI.
Mhm.
And where do you see the opportunities? Where do you see some of the challenges, some of the headwinds? I'd love to
Sure.
maybe just sort of get your take on what's the actual practical application of it, and where some of the downsides can be.
Yeah, that's I guess it's like anything, almost in a humorous way. So every time I get a news feed or something like you, it's like everything AI. It's almost like a new drug on the street, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I think if you really step back, um, does AI have a lot of great practical application? Yes, but I think it's really finding where is that? And I think probably one of the best ways that I can see stepping in to this area, because there are a lot of issues and regulations and things that have not been, keeping up, and because it's moving so fast along those lines. So, there's a lot of ethical concerns. There's a lot of, bias and things you got to be, yes, all those things are there. So knowing the fact that those sort of guardrails are sitting out there, and there are others, privacy, everything else that goes along with it, it's almost like if you're not moving, if you're standing still, you're already behind. So you got to be able to find, where can I bring this forward? I think some of the practical areas that I see as a way to step in is, what are some back office, manual sort of things that are being done that, AI with its capabilities can help you deal with that sort of workload challenges. It's almost like in most organizations, ours is no different than others, is like, this sort of work-life balance, overload and everything else. And it's work-life is truly important, but along those lines, but what's causing that? And it's a workload issue. And a lot of it's dealing with manual stuff. So I definitely, from an AI perspective, look at my back office operations, look and see, where can AI with its power and ability to do massive research, summarizations, things along those lines, to get those things done. That's one of the key things. The other one would be, there are a lot of front office things that are going on, people calling in and everything else, scheduling, things of that nature. So what are the front office opportunities? To me, if I can address those using AI technology along those lines, it's almost like continuous improvement. When you address that from a continuous improvement, then also innovation inflection points start happening. You start seeing, well, maybe if I use this, or maybe this is a good use case for me to do X, Y, and Z. So it allows me to be able to deal with pain points, but at the same time, set myself up for future success. Because this technology is not going to go away. It's really going to drive us in a way to start thinking differently, and how we embrace it. So I always tell people, I said, this is not artificial intelligence. This is more like augmented intelligence. How can I give you a superpower? Or even in the sense, how can I give you a sort of an assistant who is now a virtual assistant, but who has superpower as well, be able to do those things that you are, wasting and spending a lot of time manually in that regard. So to me, back office, front office are probably some of the ground work opportunities that I would see stepping into AI be most beneficial. And then that way you have a little more time thinking about some of those more critical things, especially in healthcare, when you have to make clinical decisions. You definitely want to be very, very cautious around that.
And along those same lines is, look, you're an innovative person, you're an innovative leader. So you start to see around the curve. What's your perspective around now more than ever, there's low code and no code solutions that you can build on your own, versus having something, innovation that's outward and bringing it in and configuring it to your, where is the stance now? Do you see there is an opportunity now to build something minimal with speed, deploy, or do you still think that there's more of an opportunity where there's technologies externally bringing them in? Where do you see the balance in that? When do you build something and when do you go out and purchase something?
Yeah, and I think that's always going to be a question for executives, and especially since the talent pools and everything else are getting shorter, or just hard to get a hold of it. And because of AI, we haven't even talked about quantum computing and everything else that's coming online. And I think what people are beginning to see is that if you basically, I have to not only fail fast in a certain way, but with caution, but I got to learn fast. And what you're seeing in our marketplace and all the other marketplace, there's this shift of, we're not going to compete anymore. We're actually going to dominate. And players are coming in to dominate, or coming in with a different strategy than the past. Am I going to build all of this stuff internally? And we know that takes time, takes years and talent, versus can I do low code and no code and get the same thing done, if not at par, but even better, and put myself strategically in a better position. So it really boils down to cost. It boils down to talent that's available. It boils down to the speed and dynamic changes that are happening in the marketplace. So you have to look at all of these things. I think what we're seeing is that the building things in house may be still a possibility to do those things. It's beneficial. But what I'm saying is partnering with somebody who has a different skill set than you do becomes even more critical. And then if I'm going to do things in house and everything else, low code and no code might be that opportunity for me to do that. So I think you got more levers to pull. It gives you different opportunities. Okay, what's going on in my marketplace? How rapidly is it changing? And I cannot wait 3 to 5 years. You're literally within months before your market's taken over. So it gives you an opportunity to make some decisions in a way that's going to be very impactful for your organization.
And then just realistically, I mean, how far out, you as a leader, can you look? How far out do you try to really look and plan and engage realistically?
Yeah, I think realistically now, I do strategic foresight, which gets a little bit further out, but realistically for people today, I think 3 to 5 is probably a good comfort area, because things are changing so fast. I think if you get into a good rhythm and pace and routine of truly doing strategic planning in that 3 to 5 year, and if you want to go even out to 7, at least you're being able to look at the trends and things that are happening around you and not be caught off guard. So 3 to 5 is a very good time frame. 7 years is probably good to be out. And just it allows you to sit back and says, what are the possibilities? What are possible scenarios? And at least get them on the table and think about them. And you can have that recurring meeting and discussion around those scenarios and possibilities. One of them is probably going to come to light, but at least you're not caught off guard in doing that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's more around scenario planning as in
Yep.
addition to the strategic planning. So Dr. Woods, just maybe give a little commercial about how we can follow your work, the work of BlueCross BlueShield Tennessee. Share a little bit with the community.
Yeah, for me, I'm on LinkedIn, so you can always find Rodney B. Woods out on LinkedIn. I do a few posts. My goal in 24 is to do a lot more around innovation, strategy, thinking along those lines. So you'll see some posts if you want to be included on that. I'd be glad to do that in that regard. And once you get to contact, there's some other things I'm starting to build out. I think like anything in following healthcare, healthcare is in for some interesting changes happening in 24, whether it's our plan or any other plan. I think looking at the disruptors who are coming out like Amazon, Walmart, all the others, is where they're pushing the envelope to see how can we utilize technology in such a way to really answer a question of people getting the proper care at the right quality, at the right cost along those lines. So I would say stay tuned in that regard. If you have questions or thoughts and things, I'm always open for conversations in that regard. Just reach out to me and then we can, have those conversations and just see how we can, make an impact in this sector that we love.
Amazing. Dr. Woods, it's been such a pleasure having you on and just getting a glimpse of your brain and your thought process. It's really amazing. And for those that have joined into this particular conversation, if you found it helpful, if you found it enlightening, would you mind sharing it on social media and just expanding it with your networks? I'm very grateful when we can have just tremendous guests come on, share some of those insights and just be rigorously honest, especially when we've got a whole entire community that's really pulling at advancing healthcare forward. You need to have a community of executors, a community of doers. So, Dr. Woods, it's just a pleasure to have you on, and I'm looking forward to future conversations.
Absolutely. Michael, thank you again for the opportunity.
Amazing. It's my pleasure.